At the end of 2020, I made a promise to myself that for the next year, I would sew all of my own clothes. I had already been dabbling in garment sewing, but I wanted to get a lot better. So I said for the next year, other than a few thrifted items, some basics, and underwear, I would be making all of my own clothes. I really wanted to get better at garment sewing. I really wanted to expand my skills, and that's exactly what happened. But I also learned a few things that I really wasn't expecting, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get into it, if you are not yet subscribed, I would love if you do that. This is a place where I talk about sewing, knitting, and making my own wardrobe, all things textiles, and I would love to have you along on this journey as I make my own clothes. Let's get into today's video and talk about everything that I learned from a year of sewing my own clothes. The first thing I learned honestly came as a bit of a surprise to me, and it's that all clothes are made by hand. So let me back it up a bit. When you buy a fast fashion item or just a regular item from, the mall or store, even a slow fashion item, all those items are made by hand. They are made with a sewing machine, but you have a person who is using the sewing machine to make the clothing. You have people who are using tools to cut the fabric. You have people who are piecing them together, who are doing all of that hard work to make a garment come from a piece of fabric and turn into something that you can wear. And so no matter how much it costs or how much a store is selling it, someone made those items for you to buy. And for me, when I realized that, it really changed my perception of clothing. Because prior to that, I don't know about you, but I honestly thought that just the factories, the machines would sew, cut, piece everything together. Because I think that's what we were sort of led to believe, but that's not the case at all. It's people, literally other makers like me, who are sewing clothes for the public. And so when you realize that someone made your clothes for you, it really makes you regard your clothing in a different way, especially because of the time that it takes to make clothes, how much it costs to buy fabric, all of those things. When you think about how much you can buy a regular t-shirt for in the store, it makes you really appreciate all the shirts that you already own because you know how much time went into it. And if you don't know, it takes a long time. The second thing I learned is sort of on the same topic as, fast fashion or buying clothes in stores. For me, it was a thrift store, but it made me really look my shopping addiction in the eye and really changed my perception over the past year of shopping and what it was actually doing for me. So as I mentioned, I primarily thrifted my clothes, and so when I was feeling down, or if I was feeling happy, or if I was bored, I would just pop into the thrift store and buy something new to add to my wardrobe. But when I was making my own clothes, I vowed to do less of that, and what I noticed was that it shifted into, not so much buying clothes at the thrift store, but buying fabrics or patterns and making plans for sewing that didn't actually fit into what I wanted out of my wardrobe. I was just buying sort of to replace the buying that I was doing before. And so I ended up with fabric that didn't actually have that much of a place in my wardrobe or in my closet and didn't actually reflect any of the sewing plans that I wanted to have. And so as a result, I have moved towards a more intentional style of sewing projects that are a little bit more nuanced, that are teaching me a ton of new skills, and as a result are taking me more time. And occasionally I will sew something that comes together really quickly. Sometimes you do need a little bit of a project that is instant, gratification to keep the creative juices going. But overall, slowing down the process has made my garments come together in a much more clean and professional way. They're gonna last longer, and they're gonna actually be things that I want to keep in my wardrobe. Just like those fast fashion items or those thrifted items that are bought on a whim, the items that I made that came together really fast or came together sort of spontaneously are not actually items that I wore that much in the past year. And so intentional sewing is the goal for 2022. And so speaking about intentional sewing, the next lesson that I learned is that the insides of a garment are as important as the outside of a garment. So when you see, a clothing item, you see what I'm wearing, it's pretty on the outside, and you don't really think any more about what is happening inside of the garment. While sewists think a lot about the inside of a garment because they're working really closely with the inside. You don't actually really even see the outside that much until you're done because you've been piecing everything together from the inside out. And so that is what you're familiar with. The insides are also really important because that is where the piece comes together structurally. So for me, when I first started sewing, I was sewing with like really strange seam allowances. I wasn't paying attention to the seam allowances, or I was cutting my seam allowances way too close, and in the wash they would fray or unravel and cause for holes in the seams, or I would kind of finish them sloppily if I had to do top stitching on the seams, and then you would notice the seams were a little bit wonky on the sides, and I just wanted to finish the garment quickly, so I sewed the inside sort of erratically and without much care for detail. And as I did that, pieces would fall apart, or they would kind of get like ratty on the inside, which then didn't make me feel good about wearing them because there were a bunch of loose threads and it just didn't look nice, and because of that it didn't really feel good to wear. And so I started to really focus on seam finishes. Like French seams became a favorite for me. Binding my seams was another one. I also really enjoyed learning other closed seams like flat felt seams. Learning all these techniques made me really proud of the finish on the inside and made me really proud to wear the item, and it also made it look so much better on the outside. The fourth thing that I learned was honestly not expected at all, but I was constantly being asked to monetize my new skill. People were always saying, "Wow, you made that. You should sell those." Or, "Will you make one for me? I'll pay for it. Have you thought about selling your designs online? Have you thought about knitting for other people? Are you taking commissions?" So on and so on. And at first I felt like I had to sell my pieces because if other people were saying that they wanted them, then that must mean that that's something that I should be doing. I should be monetizing that way. But I really didn't want to sell anything that I made. I really wanted to make things for me. And I also really wanted to just get better, and I didn't want to share that with anyone else yet. I wasn't ready, and I'm still not ready. And so being asked to constantly monetize off of this skill was something that's become, a bit of a strange feeling for me because I want to hold on to my sewing practice and build it, and maybe down the line it's something that I will do. But I'm still such a new sewist, and I still really enjoy the process, and I want to keep enjoying that process and keep it something for me, and that's totally okay. The last thing that I learned, and honestly probably the biggest and most important one for me, other than expanding my own skills and all of that stuff, is that I really saw my personal style begin to develop. And that was the coolest thing. When I first started sewing, I was sewing with random fabrics, things that I thought were pretty, but when I brought home didn't fit into my wardrobe at all. I was sewing what other people were sewing, so things that were trendy or new patterns that came out that maybe didn't reflect my personal style, but that other people were making, and I wanted to kind of fit into the sewing community, so I would make them as well. Or as I mentioned, just sewing on a whim because I wanted to have something quickly, but I didn't actually think about how it would fit into my wardrobe long term. So as I started to slow down my sewing process, I started to see my personal style come through. I did a little exercise where I put together a color palette, and then I started to only buy fabrics that fit within that color palette. I started to play with textures. So if I noticed that I was buying a lot of blue, I would play with the shades of blue, or I would play with the textures in the fabrics to have everything complement each other. And the result has been a wardrobe that has come together really cohesively. It's a wardrobe that fits with each other so that I can pretty much always wear something that I made because it fits with the clothing that I already own, and it fits with the other pieces that I've been making for myself. Another thing is that it really has pushed the envelope on my sewing and has really taught me to sort of get out of my comfort zone. So prior to sewing my own clothes, I would never wear dresses. I don't really like dresses, or I didn't really like dresses all that much, but sewing dresses is really fun, and I was seeing all these amazing and creative dresses and seeing them styled in really cool ways that I kind of wanted to try it out for myself. And so I started sewing dresses, and I fell in love with dresses. And I wouldn't say that they've replaced pants or jeans or whatever, which are something that I really love wearing, but they've added a new dimension so I can play with layering. I'm wearing a dress right now, and I would never have like really worn a dress in the winter before. So I've really loved how sewing has made me play with the pieces in my wardrobe, play with how they work together, expand out of my comfort zone. Like when I made my flannel Wilder dress, that was so out of my comfort zone. I did not expect to love this gigantic dress, but it is one of my favorite pieces, and it's so comforting to wear and feels so comfortable, and surprisingly fits with everything so well and feels like me when I wear it. So it's not always going to be a win. You're going to have things that don't feel like you, but the more that you sew and the more that you hone in on the things that you like and the things that you feel good in, and you start to notice what those are, you'll really expand your wardrobe and your mindset around your clothing. And that for me has been so rewarding. Looking forward into 2022, I'm definitely gonna keep up mindful sewing those longer projects that take a bit more time, and investing in really lovely fabrics to go with it. I am also going to be working on making a toile or making a muslin, so basically like a test garment to make sure that, especially for jeans or overalls or whatever, to make sure that the garment is going to fit me the way that I want it to fit me. And again, slowing down that process. And I really want to, on that note, make jeans. And so that is something, Jeans January is like a big thing on Instagram and in the sewing community. So Jeans January, I'm coming for you. We're going to make a pair of jeans. I'm super excited to do it. And I am really thrilled to have you come along with me. So thank you so much for being here. Like I mentioned, if you are not yet subscribed, I would really love if you did that. You can also hit the like button if you like this video, and follow along for the rest of my sewing journey. I think 2022 is going to be a really awesome one for me, and I would also love to hear about what you're up to. Thanks so much. Bye.